Hello photography family, Todd Peak of Peak Photography, and I hope you're having a great day. Hey, thanks for joining me in this next video of our Exposure Triangle series. Today we're going to be talking about ISO. ISO? ASO?
My mind is going a mile an hour.
That fast.
Oh.
Hey, listen, full disclosure, this is the third time I've recorded this video, and man, have the last two been boring. So I'm gonna try to keep this tutorial nice and quick. So come on, let's learn together. Now, there are several wonderful videos on the history of ISO and why it's pronounced the way it is. So if you're a special kind of photography nerd and you'd like to learn more, I'll link the videos down below. But if you're here and you just want to learn what ISO is and how it affects your images, that's what we're going to cover today. So let's get started. ISO is the measure of the camera's sensor's sensitivity to light. So to keep this in simple terms, because I'm a simple man, ISO is like a gain dial for how much light you want to add to the image. As we saw in last week's video, and if you missed it, I'll link it above, shutter speed directly impacts the amount of light coming into the image. So as we'll learn next week in the aperture series, the aperture also directly impacts the amount of light coming into the sensor's image. The ISO, however, digitally adds the exposure of the light to the image. So for the purposes of today's video, ISO is the measure of light added to the image digitally. Now, we've been pretty clear that the amount of light can have a direct result on the sharpness of the image. So why would you not crank the ISO up really high and get a lot of light into the image? Well, because we're not putting in natural light into the image.
Oh yeah!
We're introducing light that isn't really there. So increasing the ISO will by nature introduce noise or grain into the image. So it's important that if you're wanting a clean and sharp image, you'll want to shoot with the lowest ISO available to you. I had the privilege of shooting at Blue Circle, the iconic home of the Circle Burger. Mark and Debbie were kind enough to allow me to come in and shoot a few nights ago. I love this place, its history, its food. But the main purpose of shooting there was to get a few shots to help us see what happens when we adjust the ISO in the image. Now, this first picture was at ISO 100. I had a shutter speed at a 20th of a second. I was at aperture f4. You can see as we zoom in on the patrons at the counter, the image is nice and clean. But when we jump to ISO 4000 with a shutter speed of 6/40th of a second to expose the image correctly, you can see the noise introduced in the image. And then when we go to the extreme at an ISO of 64,000, I had to use a shutter speed of 1/8000th of a second to properly expose the image. And if we wanted to print this or use it in any way, the noise is so bad that the image is basically unusable. So why would you ever shoot with a higher ISO? Well, as we learned last week in the shutter speed tutorial, when we're trying to freeze the action, we need a higher shutter speed to do so. But when we use a faster shutter speed, we reduce the amount of light that we're letting onto the image. Sometimes to correctly expose the image, the only thing you can do to get the shot is to increase the ISO. Now, if I had taken this shot using the lowest ISO of 100, hoping for a nice clean shot, this is what the image would have looked like. In order to freeze the image at a shutter speed of 1/800th of a second, this picture would have been way underexposed. I already had the aperture almost wide open. The only way to get the proper exposure was to increase the ISO. This image, it was shot at an ISO of 6400, shutter speed 1/800th of a second, with the aperture at f3.2. Now, each camera is going to have a different sensitivity to the range of your ISO. Your camera might be an ISO beast and have no problem shooting at an ISO 32,000. Or your camera may be really noisy at an ISO of 32,000. It's going to be up to you to determine the level of your tolerance for ISO ranges, and ultimately what you're using the image for will also dictate what you can use in the ISO range. But what if you want a lot of grain in your shot? Maybe you're going for the old-timey black and white image with a lot of grain. Then go for it. Crank up the ISO, increase your shutter speed to get the correct exposure, and have fun. This is what it's all about: being creative and using the tools at your disposal to get the image you want. So let's finish today with just some basic rules of thumb, and this is just what I use. You may find something that works better for you. But if I'm shooting outside during the day and there's a lot of natural light, I always make sure my camera is on the lowest ISO setting of 100. If it's dawn or dusk and I'm needing more light, I'm still going to try to keep the ISO as low as possible and use my shutter speed with the use of a tripod to get the exposure that I want. But if I'm going into a poorly lit room or a gymnasium, and I know that I plan on trying to freeze action, I'm going to have to start with my ISO elevated. Now, depending on the light in the room, I might start with an ISO 1600 or 3200, and then I'll go from there. But I always try to set my ISO first. It keeps me from making big mistakes, which I have done before, and taking a ton of images that are overexposed or underexposed. And there are ways to make sure that you don't do that by using your histogram. And we'll cover that in future videos. So ISO, don't be afraid of it. Use it to your advantage. And the best way to learn? That's right, get out and take some pictures. If you've learned something today, and I hope you have, would you smash the like button? And if you'd like to learn more, these tutorials are free. Subscribe for more weekly content and share this video with a friend. Next week, as mentioned, we'll learn about the aperture and how to get those awesome portrait shots with tons of bokeh. Thanks for joining me, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.